Yeah, I'd welcome any pictures or anything like that. Okay, so, all done? Okay. So what do we mean by action? So, the action piece, for me, is what distinguishes organizing from all the other things that are kind of similar. And what I mean is, it's not just about forming relationships. It's not just about understanding oneself, one's own motivations. It's not just about doing good deliberative work with other people. In a sense, all that is preliminary. And there's a lot of efforts to stop right there. Oh, we learned something about ourselves, we formed some new relationships, we deepened our understanding of our motivations, and those are all wonderful things. But fundamentally, organizing is not only about changing the self, it's about changing the world. And changing the world means translating that insight, energy, understanding into something that actually reorganizes the environment out there, that actually changes things out there, that creates a school where there wasn't one, right? That stops lousy employment practices from happening where they happen, that it makes a real difference in the world and in the environment within which we work. And so that's really kind of where the real rubber hits the road in the whole thing. Because if it stopped short of action, it was very nice, felt very good, didn't make any difference in the world. It may have made a difference to you, and that's fine. But that's not what it's all about. So I really want to emphasize that. And the way we're looking at it is that a way to think about how the world changing happens is through the process of mobilizing and deploying resources. In other words, taking resources that are out there, configured in a particular way, often scattered among individuals, mobilizing them, meaning bringing them to collective purpose, bringing them into collective purpose, like the bus boycott, and then deploying them in such a way that changes things, that changes the policy of the bus company, that creates a credit union where there was not one, or whatever. Does this make sense? Is this, I mean, it's not like so complex, but it is crucial in terms of getting into where, what's really important about organizing. So there's a few key things I just want to point out about this. First, we talk about the relationship between where resources come from and how they're used, okay? In other words, where you get the resources out in the world and how you use them. So what's the connection there? I mean, we explore it in the readings. There's a bunch of cases, or not cases, they're not exactly formal cases, but there's a lot of examples. You all, in terms of your projects, what's this about? This connection between deployment and mobilization? Or what, is he curious about it, or what's the connection? Yeah, well, wait, I'm going to cut you with your permission. I'm going to make an effort here to ask somebody to speak who hasn't spoken before. Or maybe you've spoken sometime, but I don't want to do cold calling, but I will. Because we want to try to get a little different, a little broader rhythm here. Relationship between mobilizing and deploying resources. What's the connection between them? I guess we're going to have a Quaker meeting.
In which I also happen to be a Quaker.
Oh, well, all right. Let's see. Ian? No, Mishka? No, see, you guys are regulars, and this is good, and this is great. No, and I sure don't want to, but I want to try to broaden the conversation a bit. No. Let's see. Hey, John.
Actually, this is something I was confused about.
Okay.
I don't quite understand the relationship between the two. So, yeah, I don't think I have a very good
But I mean, is
contribution
there
here.
something particular that seems to puzzle you about it?
Because it seems like you can't decouple the two. So I don't know how you decouple the two. How do you think about decoupling the two things?
The mobilizing of resources from the deployment of them?
Right.
Who has an example of a decoupled where you mobilize resources one place or one way and you deploy them in a different way? Yeah. Oh, wait, Mark, you're okay. Let's keep going. I'm doing good. Anybody have an example? Hang on. Come on, that was productive. An example of okay. Who said who had Mark? Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, I mean, where you get your resources from are going to constrain what kind of mobilizing you can do. So I was thinking, if you take money from a corporation and then you're doing like anti-corporate organizing, that's going to, yeah, I'm not sure. It's gonna be a problem.
Yeah, it's gonna what?
Well, you'll risk losing your funding, probably.
Quite likely. Yeah. Shirley?
Well, I don't have the same kind of example, but what I'm thinking about is the mobilizing side is the constituency that's going to put the pressure, which is the deployment part. And they'll put the pressure on the powers that have the bigger resources, like the money that you want, or the decision-making power.
So you're mobilizing resources from your constituency, deploying them in relationship to somebody who's got more resources that you want to get. Is that what you're describing?
That is what I'm saying.
Okay. What's a very clear I mean, Mark talked about a decoupling, gave an example. How many of you have ever worked with an organization that gets a grant from a foundation to do its work? And then the work that's done is out in some community, right? Mm-hmm. And what happens at the end of the grant? Usually, not all the time. Huh?
No more program.
Usually no more program. When you're talking about how to do your program, what figures most in your thinking about how to articulate and report on what you do? Who are you concerned about reporting to? Yeah, I mean, it's so taken for granted that may not even be thinking about it. Is that the only way it can be? And what sort of problem does that create if you go and get money one place, it's usually money, and then turn it into work in the community in another place? What's the problems there? What's an alternative to that? Yeah, George.
Well, I mean, the problem is that the interests of those that are funding may not be the same as the interests of those of the community. So you find yourself in a real bind trying to address both of the interests. And I think the way that you can actually come around it is by developing as good of an understanding as you can of what the commitments are of the community and seeing those as a priority, and finding the funding that can help achieve those aims. I think it's much easier to do that than to try and do the reverse, where you just find the funding and then you try and find the community in which you can actually apply the restrictions of the funding.
Which do you think happens more commonly? Yeah.
Well, my experience is that there's an organization, well, I guess my experience is dealing with organizations that are already going, and you have to find something within the organization that matches a foundation, and you apply for a grant from there, and you have to find another foundation.
How much time do you think, how much leadership time do you think goes into thinking about how to, where to get the next grant from, and how to keep the one that you have, and meet with funders? I mean, it's a deeply institutionalized way we have of providing resources for lots of community-based work. And what I want to call your attention to is that there are some real costs to that. There's some real problems to that. Now, what's an alternative way of mobilizing resources? I mean, in a way we've been talking about it all semester, but who has a project where the resources come from the same place where they're being deployed? Yeah. Give a shoot.
My project is run based on everyone pays a $15 membership fee, and that's enough to cover all of the sorts of copies and things and supplies that we consume.
So what are the benefits of that?
The benefit of that is that we're accountable to the people who spend the money, and the people who spend the money are the constituents, so the interests are automatically aligned.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's the alternative. I mean, or some mix of them. But that one that Ann just described is often just not even thought of. Or, well, we can't do that. Or, well, the people are too poor. Or they can't. And so there's a real constriction of imagination there that, and risk, I think, that why, because then there are more implications to that, aren't there, besides conflict of interest. One might be that the interests are in conflict. What are some other problems with that decoupling of where you get the money or where you get the resources and where you deploy them? What are some other problems with that? Concussions. I gotta have some more commitments from other people. I'm gonna do more cold calling.
I'm not sure which category I'm in, though.
Go ahead, Katja. No, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking that if you raise money from your constituency, then that builds their commitment to your organization. If you don't, then you don't have this added benefit of their commitment.
And so what does that mean about, what's the big question, what's the title of this course? And then what comes after the colon?
People power.
Yeah, so what happens about the relationship between people and power if the resources don't come from the people? I mean, this is what happens. You know, on the other hand, if people are in fact contributing their resources, not only is their commitment deepened, but what else are you changing about a community? Yeah, their involvement in their capacity, right? Because then it's not like providing services, you know, it's like this, you know, the McKnight thing about service or better. Then you're actually creating that community's capacity to take care of itself, and that begins to alter the power balance that's often the source of the problems in the first place. So without that, you know, you may do good work, and people think, you know, and it's fine, it's great, it's nothing wrong with it, but it's not reconfiguring power relations in the world. And I think it's really important to look at that, because to the extent that so many of these problems are functions of unequal power. And then, so, you know, you go to somebody that's got power to give you resources to take care of people that don't, and then it just feeds through that way. When does it ever change? Now, you know, in the farm workers, we had the early on, there were lots of offers of outside money. And these are always rejected. And people thought it was kind of nuts, because that was the beginning of the poverty program. There was a lot of stuff going around at the time, and it was always rejected. People paid dues of $3.50 per family, right? This was way back in the 60s. That was a lot of money, I mean, relatively speaking. And got a small death benefit, very small death benefit for that, a newspaper. They could join the credit union. And people would say, farm workers are too poor, they can't pay that. You're going to make somebody choose between food and dues? We were very hardcore about this, because the whole premise was that unless people had some form of ownership in the organization, then it just was never going to be theirs. It wasn't going to be. It might do good works and so forth. They wouldn't feel entitled to make claims on the organization. And you know, on paper you can do it a lot of different ways, but you know, people kind of know. And when you're sharing the cost of the thing, you have an entitlement to go in and demand responses that you don't have otherwise. That's kind of, so I mean, so there's a whole series of issues that relate to where you get resources and how you use them. Aaron, yeah.
I don't know if any of you guys heard the example of the folks that were here yesterday from Shore Bank in Chicago, but I was at a luncheon and I heard kind of the vision of how it started. This is a bank in Chicago that started in the 70s, and they went into Southside Chicago where everybody was leaving and all the financial resources were going away, and they got people to, they built a building there, and they got people to invest their money there, and now they have $1.8 billion in assets, and they used a community organizing approach. They were working with churches and with organizations there. Olinsky was there then.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to this guy yesterday, and it was an amazing story of, and the one principle he said that's transferable to any other community, he says a lot of things are unique about where we're at, but he said the one thing is that we're committed to the neighborhood, and we're committed to building the self-confidence of the people there, that they would invest into this bank and that it would be theirs. And he was an outsider, but the other leaders with him were all insiders from the community. So I just think it's a really good example.
That's a great example. Yeah, South Shore is a famous
Yeah.
story of community redevelopment in that way. No, again, it's what credit unions do. It's not, but and so I think it's a question of how you think of what you assume. Like if you live in the grant world and you assume that that's how things work, then that's where it ends. Because it's risky to sort of say, okay, I'm going to put my fate in the hands of the extent to which the community actually supports what I'm doing and supports it by contributing resources. Whoa. Of course, there's a little value in that, right? In terms of, one of the problems of external resources is, and it's in the strategy example last week, is, you keep on doing the wrong thing over and over and over again. As long as the money keeps flowing, you keep on doing it. But if there's a mechanism of accountability in the community, well, then it's different. And and I mean, so, engaging this tension is very important. Yeah, Michelle.
There's a very interesting example about this. There's an organization called 6S. They are operating in South Africa. And what they do is that they refuse the model of granting or getting a grant from an organization or offering a grant that way. They start by organizing the peasant because there's a dry season. Nobody gets work and everyone ends up unemployed and so on. So they build their capacity by engaging them in a process of self-generating income. And after that, they offer them a grant and they decide, or some money, and they decide what to do with it. They don't ask them to do or to give a plan in advance. They only give them the money and they decide what will they do based on what they learned from them.
Now, no, and I'm sure there are other examples as well. Now, if you take this and sort of build on this, then what kind of resources does an organizing effort need to make the most of? I mean, this is sort of a leading question. I realize that, but I mean, in other words, yeah.
I'd say the moral resources, like time, effort, energy, and acquired resources that don't involve money, more like your acquired resources, the skills that you gain, leadership skills.
So who's got examples of those kinds of resources that they're drawing upon to drive their projects? Probably most everyone, I would think, right? How of the resources that you're drawing upon to do your project, how many of them are paid for resources, and how many of them are contributed resources? Or, I don't mean an exact thing, but just think for a moment. Are most of the resources that you're drawing upon to do your project paid or contributed? Which paid? Let me see paid. Let me see contributed. Is the question clear? No. They're volunteer resources for the most part, right? And see, there's a difference between thinking of volunteerism as a nice thing you do on Sunday afternoon in a soup kitchen, as designing ways in which people can voluntarily commit their time, energy, and effort to changing their lives and those of people around them. That's the volunteer aspect of all this. That isn't about being a nice volunteer, but it's an essential piece of it because that's how people own it. That's how people own it. Yeah, Jorge.
There are degrees of what is the sense of urgency.
Yes.
And what I found in a lot of the readings for today is that, of course, the sense of urgency, it's like the day-to-day life. Like they are in a situation of oppression, or they want to claim something. But when this level of urgency or sense of urgency it's little, then it's more difficult to push them to do some action. And so I felt that we were assuming kind of in the readings that the sense of urgency is already spread out, but not necessarily, not always.
So how do you deal with that? Who's had a problem with a lack of perceived urgency in the people that you're working with? Okay, so how have you addressed it? How have you tried to address it? Wait, let me see those hands again. All right, let's see. Paula, how have you tried to address it?
By working with the constituents to identify shorter term goals. So small kind of daily things or weekly things that we can achieve.
How does that create urgency?
Because it creates a sense of a deadline for that day's session or that, we go twice a week. So for that day's session or that week's 2 sessions.
And you're working with young people?
I'm working with young people.
Who are how old?
They're middle schoolers, so they're about 13, 14, 15, and then a couple high schoolers, and so they don't really plan a month in advance the way we do.
Yeah.
So they kind of are there that day, and what do we have to get done today by 5 o'clock before you have to walk home?
I thought that's how we work too. Erin, what about you?
Yeah, I guess kind of the same. I mean, I mean, our problem is just fighting with the organization that's supposed to be supporting our project. So it's more of trying to tell them that there's purpose in constituents mobilizing to support the overall project. So I guess for us, it's been more trying to just do what we're doing and report into the larger organization and let them know what's going on. And
but does that give them much urgency?
I think for the constituents it does, because the constituents kind of feel like, okay, we're going to just start doing this. And if they're going to play around and have these meetings with these high-level people and not get anything done, at least we'll have our part done so that when they need us, we're here. So I think in that sense, I don't know if there's a sense of urgency so much, but there's at least people getting excited about it.
Okay.
So something's happening.
Who's got a project where there's clear urgency? Janie, you got real urgency?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think so. What the way our project is focused right now is against the 4437 anti-immigration bill, or the very immigration criminalization bill, I'll call it. And so, I mean, I think that's definitely a sense of urgency, organizing people to know about it. And I guess it already has been pretty much nixed, but continuing the momentum and saying that although this one may not be the one, there could be something else just as evil with a nicer title. So just getting people aware about that, I think, is an urgency, because once it passes, it passes.
Jorge, what were you going to say?
No, what I was trying to say is that, yes, you can have a timeline, a very detailed timeline, but if the vision is not shared, and we've talked about this a lot, that then sometimes you misunderstand what the people is trying to believe, and then when you realize that the vision wasn't shared at all.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to talk about my project. What I was trying to say is that we shouldn't just take for granted that in every organization the urgency is there.
Absolutely.
And I felt that a little bit in the readings. All the people were like very poor, or in the case of Chavez and La Causa, it was obvious.
Well, is it obvious? I mean,
I know that he used another
no, because
kind
I'm
of
ask, how many of
tactics.
you worked in poor communities where there's absolutely no sense of urgency of addressing the problem of poverty at all? Haven't we? I mean, so it's kind of, it's not an assumption that just because people are desperate that engaging in organizational activity is urgent. It may be that what's urgent is just like getting enough food put together for the next day. So then the question of how you bring urgency to organizational activity, to committing resources to a common effort, how do you do that? Where does that come from? It's not to be assumed. Isn't that what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks? About motivation and strategy and how these things are coupled together, and the significance not only of desperation but of hope, and the relationship of strategy to creating hope, right? In other words, it seems like I think your question is right on. You're not going to get people to contribute resources under any circumstances, I think. I mean, people will contribute resources to WGBH to get a tax break at the end of the year, but then the urgency is the tax date, and they got a lot of money anyway. But it's very hard to get people to commit to action, right, unless it's experienced as urgent. And it seems like part of the challenge of the organizer is to construct urgency. And I don't mean fake it, but I mean put together a combination of strategy and motivation and focused opportunity that it is urgent to act on. Because it is hard. Changing habitual practice is hard. It's not easy. And so, but once you start cranking the thing over, then it happens. And kind of what's at stake. Because the other problem with the outside money is that you get that, you keep doing this stuff, and you never have to convince anybody it's urgent. And so the level of commitment that it takes to actually do transformational work is never given. And the experience of making that commitment, acting and learning from it never happens. And so it's this kind of a self-deception that I'm here doing my thing. But yeah.
I think one of the challenges that I've been facing is this whole idea of the fact that it almost feels that a lot of the things we're doing are sort of linear. And we touched on it when you started talking about the connection between motivation, strategy, and urgency. And what I found actually has helped my project, it actually has been one of the things that I've been struggling with the most, is sort of going back to sort of the overall goal, like why are we even doing this? Yes. This whole motivation piece. And I felt like I was actually neglecting it. Initially, I used it sort of to try to be able to mobilize these individuals, to get them interested. And once I felt like I had established this, then I focused more on developing the relationship, the community building, getting people to do stories, and but sort of the overall motivation for doing this project, I think, started falling back. Yeah. And I felt like what I started having to do was going back to the original motivation and trying to tell them, like, this is why it needs to be done. This is why we just can't expect it to be done either the year after or whatnot. And it's been a challenge for me to remember that I have to be continually utilizing some of the strategies we've been learning time and time again in order to just kind of be able to move forward.
Yeah. No, it's just absolutely right. I mean, that's like, you know, I think we mentioned before in a couple of weeks the Easter story. We're going to hear that again, right? Mm-hmm. It keeps getting told every year. Passover story keeps getting told. With the Sierra Club session we had, it was kind of amazing because they've sort of lost connection with their own story. Mm-hmm. We're talking about where should we have these training sessions that we're going to have with them. And you know, they're used to having training sessions at the Holiday Inn, right? Sierra Club. And you know, I was getting them very interested in stories and storytelling, and they were really getting into the storytelling stuff. And so somebody said, well, we should have a session around a campfire, you know, because that's really where stories are told. Yeah. And I said, yeah, that's cool. And then somebody said, yeah, can you imagine a campfire in the lobby of the Holiday Inn? It's like, you know, well, then what kind of place should we get? Well, what about a camp? You know, what about, you know? And I was like, oh, we didn't think of that. Now, it's not to make fun of the Sierra Club, but it's like right there. But you get, you know, and for those folks, connection to the wilderness and the wild, that's a big deal. That has a whole spiritual content. I mean, it's very important. But it's so easy to get disconnected from that and just kind of lose that, and then you lose the ground from which to get the commitments that you need in order to build a power. So no, George, that's it.
Who is the Sierra Club?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a major environmental organization, the U.S. That has about 800,000 members and 360 groups and chapters around the country. And they do outings and hikings and all that, but they also do the litigation, they also do policy work, and they're sort of kind of I think the leading environmental group in terms of, you know, fighting the administration and doing good things from a value neutral perspective. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to about the Sierra Club, but it's an interesting group because, you know, they have a real kind of, there's a real strong moral grounding to what they're doing, which is their relationship to the wilderness, and it's interesting. But anyway, yeah.
Just to speak to your point, because I've run into that, and so then I think, well, so how do you problem solve that scenario? And what I tried once was to have, when I got a little smarter, was to have them actually remind each other what their motivations were. So I was only doing that additional work with one person, and then having them do the additional work with everybody else, because I know that I always felt like I have to be a cheerleader because that's my role and help them through it and everything. But now that, well, that's useless because once my energy goes away, then what's left, for them?
Good idea.
No, it's great. And I mean, once you give people license to do storytelling in the way we've been talking about it, it becomes the most natural kind of thing. And it's just amazingly energizing. So it's just a resource sitting right there in terms of people. So I want to go on to some other things, but just want to challenge you to really think about the connection here and the costs, the trade-offs in terms of where you go to get resources and what kinds of resources you build your strategy out of. I mean, because if you build a strategy out of money-dependent resources, well, then that's where you're stuck. And, you know, so it's choices to be made about inside, outside, people, money, kind of where. And then the real deal is, see, if you think of this as a loop that can either shrink or grow, right? The real deal is deploying resources in such a way that they come back and generate more. And that's real moral resources, as Nayad said.
Can I ask you to repeat the definition of deploying resources once more?
Using them, translating them into program, into action, into building things, into training people, into reconfiguring the world somehow. Reconfiguring the world out there. And so one of the things that always appealed to me about union organizing is that it's built in. In other words, to the extent that you win a contract, then that generates an additional dues base. And so the more successful you are, the more your resources grow. And so thinking about how to couple success in doing what you're doing with generating more resources, not using up the resources, that's a crucial piece. And of course, that's why organizations have dues. I mean, you know, as simple as that. But you think about other ways that you can, farm workers, we care, always farm workers, but you know, we raised money everywhere we went. I mean, if it was a meeting, if it was on the street, you always had your can where you were asking for money. I mean, it was just built into the deal. It was just like you asked for money and you asked for volunteers everywhere you went. And I mean, I was walking down the street in New York one time with a big sign, boycott grapes, and I had this big coffee cup in my hand. I was walking along and somebody threw money in the coffee cup. Because they were so well trained. You know, we had them really well trained. You see somebody at farm workers sign and some kind of object, and then they'll contribute to it. No, I just got a lot of fun with this stuff. And it's amazing the thousands and thousands of dollars you could raise on the street in New York every day. I mean, just amazing. We had a guy that his spot was, I guess it's Madison Square, Pennsylvania Station, where the people come out from the trains and all that. Marcos Munoz used to describe there was this place in New York where every morning at a certain time people come out of holes in the ground, and all you have to do is be there with your can, and you know you were going to raise a lot of money. He was right. You know. So it's again, it's thinking creatively. How do you turn people resources into money resources? How do you make big things add up out of small things? And that's how it builds. GBIO, for example, where does its resources come from for the most part?
Well, there's institutional fees, organizations, but they also get foundation money because of what I was going to ask about accommodation, and tons of human.
Big time human resources, but then the churches and the unions that belong to it contribute. Right, so they have organizational dues. And I mean, later on, we would get outside money, like from a union or a church, when we had enough autonomy to leverage it.
So they do get, that's what you're saying, foundation grants after you.
I mean, I don't like foundation grants, period, because they put constraints on you in terms of political action. And that's a whole other issue that is about it. But the point is, I think that you preserve your autonomy if you have multiple sources.
Okay.
But you really need, unless your base is your constituency, then you really don't have the kind of, it's very hard then to just do a dance among foundations or something. Then you've got your base there, and then you're in a position that you can leverage other sources. Yeah.
In Venezuela, when we were in the process of promoting the referendum and getting the signatures.
Yeah.
We had 1,000 places where people signed, and in the package that we sent to every place, we had a bottle with a thing. And in those moments, people start, you know, if I want my signatures to be processed, I need to help.
Exactly.
And in that period, the organization blossomed.
Yeah.
But after that, we needed to convince international that the signatures were true. So we started seeking money international.
Yeah.
And we started finding money abroad. But that's when the organization began to shrink, because people got disengaged from the process of doing the work.
And it looks easier.
It looks
easier.
No, it's
that's what's so seductive about it. It looks easier. It looks like a shortcut.
But it's not a shortcut.
No,
it's a long cut.
Yeah. Fred Washington.
We have to be taking.
That's right.
Oh, yes.
Shortcut.
It looks, but it's not.
It is a long cut. That's very, very true. Okay. Now, in the readings or in the organizing notes, you talk about collaborative and claims-making forms of action, and we've talked a lot about that. I mean, about the difference between power with and power over, and there's lots of examples in there of different kinds of action that helps build claims-making, other that helps build collaborative. I mean, there's the little example, the Cesar Chavez story. That's in there, right? I didn't cut that out of the reading, did I? This is where, not the boycott and the fast, those are other very interesting stories, but the one about the House meeting. A very little story. You know, what do you see? I mean, that was like his first House meeting. Well, sort of. I mean, kind of mythic first House meeting. But what do you see as collaborative kinds of action tactics that were used in that example? What was he trying to make happen to strengthen collaborative power with in there? Wait, I'm going to... Selena.
I'm sorry, I did not do that reading.
Okay. Who did the reading? Mike. All right. Yeah. There's a new face. That's good.
Well, I'm trying to remember. I remember there were some people there with their specific interests.
Right.
And I don't know if Caesar came up with the idea of the credit union.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember.
No, but I mean, that's right. I mean, people were talking about financial problems, right?
Right.
And so the form of action that was being offered was join a credit union. Right. I mean, it was kind of like, okay, that's people actually joining a credit union, putting money in. I mean, that's a great form of collaborative, you know, building power with. But there were also some examples in that little meeting about doing some work that was going to lead to building power over, to challenge power over. Do you remember that? There was something else that he asked people to do. Yes, Joy.
You had people put their names on a card and the amount, the wage that they thought would be fair wage.
Yeah. And so why was that? How does that contribute?
Well, they got their names and addresses for one.
Okay, good. That's right. Exactly.
But then they also had some idea of what people's real interest in wage was when they went to the growers.
And how does it experience it? What's the experience like that someone's asking you to say how much you think your labor is worth when no one has ever asked you that?
They have a very clear vision and goal, and that's a motivating force for them.
Yeah, and in a very small way, it's an experience of some agency, right? And then I think the story tells what they then did with these cards. Does it go on? And
no, not that this.
How the cards were used. They turned it into a whole census operation. They wound up recruiting people out of those meetings to do like a census up and down California of asking farm workers to put down how much money they thought they should earn and signing their name and so forth. And they got like, I don't know, they got like 2,000 or 3,000 of those. So then what was the next step, do you think? So they collected a couple thousand of these. What would be the next step in building money? Yeah, wait, cut you. Okay, cut you.
Well, I mean, you would you would sort of evaluate the response. You would say sort of what the average is, sort of what came out of this thing, then you compare it to the actual real wages that they earn. And you report on what you find out, and if there's a huge difference between what they actually earn and what they think they should be earning, then you can make them angry about this.
Okay. What else can you do? What other forms of action can it turn into? You go out there and you get a bunch of these. How are you getting them signed? Or how are you collecting them? Huh? What? I heard over here. Somebody said something. I heard over here. Huh?
Meetings.
Maybe more meetings, right? Maybe people getting them signed up. What are you doing? You're building a network of people capable of getting this, right? And then what else do you get out of this? You get a bunch of list of names, right? Where you can then go back and build on that. And then you have meetings. And then you, as Kachi's saying, then you talk about, well, here's what we thought collectively. See, it's like how you take these small actions and build into the next, into the next, into the next. But you can do it in either collaborative, like building power with, or building power over. It's just different pieces. And there, as I say, in the readings, there's lots of examples. We can talk some about those. But there's something about getting the idea that one action leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next. And every action that you take generates more resource. See, every action you take doesn't use up, it generates more capacity. And that's really what's exciting about organizing. Because capacity grows with commitment, and commitment is expressed through action. So, and we can talk more about collaborative and claims making different approaches, but I wanted to be sure to get to this in the spirit of not being rushed at the end.
Let's rush now.
Yeah, we'll do our rushing. Okay, so we'll be mellow at the end. That's good, yeah. That's great. That's great. I wanted to draw attention to this because the thing about action is that it either happens or it doesn't happen. Okay? And, you know, I'm sure you've had the experience of people sit around and come up with a great plan. And then what happens? Nothing. And then, or there's a half-hearted kind of effort. And then you come along with a similar plan, you know, that sounds very similar, and they say, what do they say?
We already tried it.
Oh, we tried that. That didn't work. Well, what didn't work? Yeah, it never happened. Now, you can criticize that and sort of say, well, the process then was pretty lousy because it didn't build in commitment. In other words, it was like a planning that was done apart from people actually committing to act on it, right? But boy, I wish I had a dime for every time people say, oh, we already tried that. And you know damn well they didn't try it. They never really did it. Okay? So I wanted to draw attention to some of the issues involved there in terms of actually cranking it over, making it happen. Mike, what are you thinking about? You're smiling there about this. You're thinking about a specific...
Well, I'm just thinking that where you were going in the readings about reminding people of commitment. Because sometimes in the work I'm doing at the Local 26, I get tired. I feel like I'm imposing on people all the time because I'm asking constantly on their tail, calling them, reminding them to tell this person this and tell them that. And I'm like, these people are going to hate me. And I don't know, it hasn't happened once yet. But I'm still uncomfortable with it. Like every time I make that phone call, because it's like the fifth or sixth time I've called them.
So this is great, because I think in terms of getting commitments, right here, this is one of the key issues. One of the key issues is not intellectually knowing you ought to get it, but it's actually making that ask and doing it clearly and consistently and sustaining it over time. So what do you think the issue is there? Yeah, what's wrong with you? They don't have an issue. They're happy to have you call them.
No, they have an issue.
Do they say, oh, it's you again?
No, they know I'm going to call them or whatever and remind them.
Yeah.
But it's just like, that's like my job.
Yeah.
I remember like my first week there, I was like so scared about imposing on people. But then the organizer I'm working with, she put me in my place. She said, look, we're not here to service people. We're not here to give them a sandwich. This is not a soup kitchen. We're here to kick people in their ass and get them to stand up for their union. And I was like, So I mean, it was pretty intense, but I don't know. For me, it's I like things to go smoothly, nice. Like people own it, but we were talking about what you guys were talking about earlier about reminding them, and like a lot of them forget where they come from, what the struggle is, what's going on.
Yeah. We forget that, don't we?
Oh yeah.
I mean, a lot. I mean, it's because you know the whatever's there rises to the top and then it recedes. And I mean that goes to this point of contingency too. You read the little exchange between Fred Ross and Larry Tramontola in the reading. Mm-hmm. It's really classic. It's scary. We actually all went through that. I mean, it was amazing training. I mean, boy, was I pissed. I mean, it was like no. I mean, it's like I know it's not to like glorify boot camp or anything, but it was like. Wait a second, you don't trust me, you don't think I don't know. But what he was teaching us was how to really value our work. And how to, you know, it's kind of like you put all this energy and effort into, like, you know, setting up a meeting. Or someone says they're going to come. And then, at the last minute, something happens and it just never happens. And what you did was just waste a huge amount of time, energy, and effort, when a little effort right at the end there could flip it over. And this thing about reminder calls is really, really interesting, because you know the best time to make reminder calls? Huh?
Every time.
It's a lot.
Yeah, but when's the best time? If you could,
Dinner.
let's say that it's a meeting at 6 o'clock tonight, and so, or 6 o'clock on X day that you're going to have this meeting. When is the best time to make a reminder call? Someone's committed to come, right? But, you know, they committed a week ago. So when's the best time to make a reminder call? Huh? 5 o'clock? Okay, that's one view. 5 o'clock? Yeah? The day before? How many say the day, huh?
A little more than the day before, day and a half.
All right, let's see. How many say the day before? How many say 5 o'clock? Yeah, it's 5 o'clock. I mean, and this is a scientific, no, but but see what happens is that, and just again, so much is just reflect on yourself, right? I intend to go to this thing. Yeah, it's in my book. I'm going to go there. Yeah, you call me a day. Yeah, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there. This happened to me last night. No, I'm just laughing at Gemma because she wound up going someplace in my stead to this dinner that I couldn't go to. But the reminder calls were not. Yeah. No, you know, so you plan to go, you intend to go, right? Then it gets closer and closer, and then it's like very close, and you got, oh God, you know, I have this other thing, and well, I really want to go. And then at that moment, the organizer calls, says, "Hi." I just want to remind you how much we're looking forward to seeing you. You know, we have a special seat just set aside for you. And you remember you were going to bring the cookies or whatever it is, and yeah, okay, I'll be there. Come on, doesn't this feel like your experience? Yeah. It's how it works. And so it's how we work. There's no imposition to this. This is like a recognizing of how human beings behave. And we're not blowing off the meeting because we made some huge calculated strategic choice that in our life this meeting is not. It's like stuff happens, right? And we react to it. And all of us need structures and mechanisms to remind us of what's really important to us. I mean, in a way, this is what George and others were talking about earlier, about reminding kind of what's important. And we need help with that. All of us do. And that's where things like reminder calls and these follow-up things and these are little structures. They're ways of structuring in ways in which we want to be reminded. I mean, no one's required to do this, but does this make sense? I mean, see, the other argument that Fred always used with us was that so many things can go wrong. Why leave to chance those things that you actually can exert some control over? So that you have all your energy and imagination to deal with the things that you can't, right? So the classic, I mean, how many people have ever done advance work in a political campaign? Anybody done advance work? You know what advance people do? Advance people are the people that go out ahead of the candidate and they put on the events. And they nail down the place and they nail down the loudspeakers, and they nail down the speakers, and just all this stuff. And on political campaigns, there's always a kind of fight between organizers and advanced people, because advanced people are totally focused on making that one event happen. And I have a good friend in California who's probably one of the best advanced people around. He did Jimmy Carter's visit to Berlin Wall. He did the Olympic torch thing the first time that was done. This guy Wally McGuire was really good. But he had like a little manual, and the whole deal was about detail. It was all about detail. And because he had stories, and we all had stories of, you got 2,000 people there in the park. You've got the platform. You've got the candidate. You have the local mayor, the local governor, whatever it is. You got the band, and guess what you don't have?
The microphone.
Yeah. The microphone, or you don't have the microphone, or the plug is going. Like, where's the damn plug for the sound system? I mean, I've had so many things screwed up because of sound systems, where you've got a huge crowd there, and you've got some dinky little sound system, and nobody can hear. And so I got educated about getting rock bands. I mean, we would get rock bands to give us their sound systems because those were really good sound systems. And we knew that, we had 20,000 people that would actually hear. But this is what I'm talking about. See, and these kind of little details, whether it's a sound system or whether it's a reminder call, that's where the craft here really comes in. See? That's where the craft is. That's where it actually happens or doesn't happen. And you can have all kinds of wonderful theories and strategies and so forth, and it's just not going to add up if you're not paying attention to those kinds of details and really attending to them. Yeah.
I don't know if this is silly, but I just don't see logistically how you make reminder calls an hour before. Are you serious about 5 o'clock?
Maybe 4:30.
No. Because aren't you getting ready for... I just seems like...
Well, we could go over in the corner and say, Mary, hi, just checking, It's all
We do
friendly.
both. We do the day before.
But you're talking about
yeah.
I don't know, I guess it just doesn't work in my head to do.
Well, I don't know. Oh, yeah.
I just had an experience with where I was scheduling a bunch of one-on-ones with people, and we called them all the day before to remind them, and we had like 5 people show up. So the next time we called them an hour before to remind them, and they all showed up.
Yeah. Now with cell phones, I mean, look, when I was learning to do a lot of this stuff, I mean, no cell phones, no, it was like go find a payphone and have lots of change, and, and make those calls, I mean, it was like.
You're talking about smaller meetings, not really big.
Well, it depends on how many people are charged with making reminder calls.
Okay.
I mean, you don't have one person make 500 reminder calls. Break it down, chunk it out. No, but I mean, but see, again, it's like the detail piece. And I mean, you think about in music or in any carpentry, whatever, it's always down there. See, and I think the difference between people who really do this work, any kind of work excellently, are those that understand that the detail expresses love for the work, for what it is you're doing. It really expresses the value. And it isn't like, oh, these little details, I'm not a detailed person, I'm a big thinker, that kind of stuff. Well, excuse me, I mean, it's both. And it's cherishing those details, understanding that's the difference between the switch being on and the switch being off. So building in a discipline and a practice of doing that then is a whole lot where craft comes in. And yeah,
Something that just struck me when I took the class 2 years ago. Could you talk a little bit about things like email reminders versus telephone calls?
Oh.
A lot of us get nervous and type instead of call.
Yeah. What's great about email reminders?
Send them all.
What's the problem with email reminders? It's always distinguishing between spreading information, right, and interaction. It's like relational interaction. When there's an interaction, something actually happens. When you just, you can just seed the world out there with information. It doesn't work. And so, calls. Of course, now people have phone, so you leave a message on the phone thing. That's the best you can do. But it's on a gradation, and the more that there's an actual conversation and someone says, yes, I will be there again, the closer you get to that, the more real it is. as you go over to the other end where it's just kind of like, well, I sent it out there. Well, you know, maybe it landed or maybe it didn't. Tom?
I just wanted to make a comment that sort of, for the LA high school kids who protested with the immigration bill,
oh, the walkouts.
They spread that through MySpace.
Through
MySpace.com.
Yeah.
And that's how they generated their, and text messaged each other. And it
No,
wasn't any of the like real interaction.
Well, because they're into what they're IMing with each other. Yeah, see, I don't want to say what I'm saying. Understand it as like I'm a Luddite or, you know. But I think it's really important to be careful about what you assume happens. And, you know, if you have a real interactive community going on, if the internet is so useful for spreading information. I mean, the Dean campaign used it amazingly to raise money, but they couldn't build organizations. Now, see, in this case, it sounds like it's linking together lots of organizations. And so you have these organized groups in all these different places, and so they're using this marketplace of information exchange to let each other know what's going on and so forth. But, you know, I'd just be very cautious about assuming that that turns into organization by itself. But it makes perfect sense that they would use it, though.
It led to all the walking out.
Or it coordinated.
It helped coordinate.
See, yeah.
But also with that, and unfortunately the media of course picked up on the bad side of it, asking kids what are you doing, and they said, oh, I don't know. So they did get them to walk out of the building, but you know, it failed to, you know, say this if you're asked. It failed to like build kind of the relationship between each other, knowing what they're gonna do exactly for, what they're gonna say, what message they're putting out.
Were there leadership teams at these schools? Do you know?
No.
Yes, no. What came afterwards? There was that HBO thing a couple weeks ago about the school walkouts in East LA. Did you see that?
Yeah.
I mean, this was the old walkouts, 68. I mean, it was great. It was great. I mean, partly because I was around there, but no, but it was great. Yeah, but it was great because they showed how they built that leadership team across all the high schools. Yeah.
Really good to have a screen of that because the what's his name? What Demo Esparza?
Yeah.
He was saying he
Dr.
was.
Suma Esparza.
There you go.
Yeah.
Dr. Suma Esparza. He was saying that they actually made the film as like a how-to movie, like how to organize.
Yeah.
So like just you can just tell like the conference and then the meetings and just like everything about it.
No, it was like organizing 101. Yeah, no, it's really great. It's really terrific. But yeah, I mean that was old school, right? And so they built the leadership there. But then you have a sustaining capacity that you may get an action, right? And this is I think what happened with the Dean people did. You get an action, but then to turn it into something that's sustained, somebody's got to be doing that other piece of work. And sort of figuring out how to balance. I think that's a real challenge today, is to figure out what can it do, what can't it do, what do you need to do another way. I know MoveOn is struggling with that right now. And, you know, so it's a great opportunity, but I just caution against thinking it does all the work. Yeah.
Do you think that the level, the type of reminder, like the level of interaction, the degree of interaction, reflects the level of responsibility or kind of intensity of the relationship that like is expected from that person?
What do you
think?
think?
The kids, I don't think it does.
Huh?
I think it does.
Like, for example?
Like, for example, if I need to call students from my leadership team, I call them because 4 of them are expected, or 5 of them are expected to be at a meeting. But if you have little time and need to get mass number of high schoolers to appear, you know, to make a movement, then it seems, you know, it's not like difference if 200 walk out or if 195 walk out. It still has the same impact in terms of vision. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a useful way to think about it. But you're gonna, you know, your best chance of getting the 200s is if you've got, you know, 5 or 10 who are getting the 200.
Right. When you call those.
And you're calling the 5 or 10, and then they're doing their thing, and it's like making these chains. That's how you get to scale, and you really do get to scale that way. But it takes thinking about it a little differently. But you know, then you've got, I'm responsible for getting, you know, these 20 people there, or these 10 people there. Is a very different deal than an email lands, and you sort of see it. Because that interaction is really what's important. So back over here, in terms of this craft part, and this is just different ways of focusing what we've been talking about, outcomes. You know, very clear Why do you want measurable outcomes? Well, people say, oh, you can't measure everything, right? Why would you want measurable outcomes? To measure success, to measure what else? And what else? Not achieving your goals. It's both. I mean, again, it takes it out of the clouds and it makes it real. You can grapple with it and actually deal with it and learn from it. But you know, we sometimes are afraid of this. The whole commitment thing at the other end, which Mike brought up, which is a big issue, but you know, you need to address the issue of contingency. All this stuff about reminding and double checking and making sure there's actually a place to plug in the speaker and, you know, or the equivalent thereof. It's a huge thing. The coordination piece. The coordination piece. Creating both the roles and the space for management of whatever's happening to happen. Yeah.
A question. What about if a specific outcome, for example, affects the commitment? For example, yesterday when I was reading the case of Chavez, for example, the strikers, all right? Yeah. What about, for example, if I'm a father and this is my job, but if I'm a striker, maybe I'm going to lose the job. And for example, I'm working right now with this organization with illegal immigrants, and in one of the meetings before the rally last Monday in Boston, one of the members, they said, well, I'm illegal. I'd love to go to Boston downtown, but what about if there's any problem and the police get me and they send me to El Salvador? Yeah. So how do you see that?
Well, how did they deal with it in the meeting?
Well, at least we tried to say that it was an agreement with the police as an institution, that it was allowed, the rally was a public rally, but anyway, there's a threat. It could, something could happen. And
has anybody dealt with that kind of challenge? Yeah, Jane?
In two contexts. At the Minutemen, when we showed the video on the Minutemen, they were afraid that Minutemen were going to be there and take people away and have INS there. And we said, well, you know, we're going to make sure people aren't there, we're going to have, whatever, anyways. And for the thing, the March on Phoenix, I would say about 95% of the people were immigrants, and yeah, you don't know who has papers, who doesn't, but with 20,000 people, it wouldn't, even with 7,000, and they can't take everyone away. I mean.
At the Boston one here, what they did was they had like these cards in English and Spanish, and like basically, like if that were to happen, I mean, she's right, like it would be very hard to I mean, just right there and then deport all these people. But what they did is we had these cards, and you give them to a police officer if you happen to be approached, and that's how it just says, like, right now I don't want to say anything else. Like, you don't have to say anything, you just give them the card. It's kind of like a question of turn.
The truth is that in lots of organizing activities, there's risks of all kinds. And the risk of being deported is one we dealt with all the time in farm worker organizing, because a lot of the people were undocumented. And I mean, it was kind of a choice of, like, you know, finding the courage to take those risks or not, because it just wasn't going to happen otherwise. Now, that doesn't mean you don't work to, you know, there's solidarity in numbers, right? You work all the angles you can. I mean, one time they came and deported our whole organizing committee in the broccoli industry in Salinas one time when we were, or they picked them up, the immigration picked them up, and all of a sudden we didn't have committees in 5 branches, in 5 companies. We tracked them to where they took them. They're near Livermore in California, and told them, don't sign anything. And we intervened with the governor. We got a whole thing going there that eventually we got them permits where they could come back. And boy, when they came back, it was like coming back from the dead. I mean, it was like those committees came back with their permits, and the permits were just temporary, but it was enough for them to stay there through the organizing phase. And it was like, you know, they had like this, like for a vampire, they had like a little cross, you know, they could hold up like that. And it made the organizing campaign. But those are real risks. There's just real risks, and you can't kid people about them, but you can do everything you can to try to provide as much support and encouragement. But okay, so and that's a longer conversation. But this coordination thing is really making time and space for management, and I have a story to tell about that we don't have time for, that I'll tell next time, about the significance of the time that organizers set aside for their own coordination, doing their own business. is crucial. It's like got to be the eye in the hurricane. And the one thing you can just not change is that time, because that's what gives you a chance to control the whole thing, time, and then of course outcomes that we've talked about. Last thing here is, this is from Richard Hackman's work. You heard talk before about ways to evaluate an action program. Does it solve the problem? Does it strengthen the organization? Are the people involved actually growing from their participation? Are people learning? And it's a good way to kind of evaluate tactics and actions in terms of how well they do. Okay. We have 2 minutes to go. Hey, this is very cool. Like, all right, what worked well today? Yeah. Other people. We got started on that, but we have more to do. You gotta help me out on that. Yeah.
I thought we really heard stories. Richard here from Michael's and Harvard, and that was really important.
Yeah, it's good. Good example. Yeah.
The immigration story is very relevant in the news. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
And people had their own projects to pull into.
Yeah, it makes it very real and exciting. Yeah. What else?
The importance of making the kids know what they are striking about. Like when the media interviewed them, they did not know what they were.
Oh. Know what things are for. Yeah, kind of reminding ourselves of that. What else?
I like the discussion about the difference between organizing and providing a service, and how service doesn't change the power structures and it just supports the status quo.
Things we can do better? Less rushed. What else? We do have to work on getting more people into the conversation, and you know, we should all commit to that, because I think it really helps to hear new voices, and it broadens the whole picture. Okay, so we will see you on Thursday.